The motion before the House tonight, this House would move beyond meat. Now, I look to the first speaker, Ambika Segal, Lincoln College, to open the case for proposition.
It pains me to begin my speech tonight with a confession. I eat meat. I'm probably the only person on this side of the house to say this, but I really, really love eating meat. Bacon, a Sunday roast, or preferably my nanny's chicken biryani. You might jump now to call me a hypocrite, a pathetic student lapping at the coattails of the archetypal Gen Zer, falling short as I yield to temptation, or rather, more cynically, a union presidential candidate trying to appeal to the more woke vote. But in my speech tonight, I'm going to show you that there's nothing stopping me from both eating meat and arguing that moving beyond meat is the only ethical choice. In fact, it is precisely the fact that so few of us adhere to a vegan lifestyle that puts it in a category with a lot of other ethical choices. It's not easy to forgive one's enemies, yet this is one of the central bases of Christian ethics. It's not easy to stand up to those in positions of power against institutional currents, yet this is a crucial aspect of achieving social justice. It's not easy to give up eating meat, fish, dairy, eggs, and honey, as well as a litany of other everyday activities prohibited by a vegan lifestyle. Yet it is the only way to both save our environment and truly treat animals with the dignity they deserve. We on the proposition tonight have two main tasks before us to convince you that we are right. Firstly, we must convince you that veganism is an ethical choice. To do this, I, along with, I'm sure, my fellow speakers, will draw upon a wide array of rather clear evidence that vegan lifestyles help the environment in a crucial way and can help to end the exploitation and cruel treatment of animals around the world. Secondly, we must establish that moving beyond meat is not only an ethical choice, but the only ethical choice. This will involve showing the true scale of the environmental impact of the meat and dairy industry, refuting the idea that veganism is an expensive or inaccessible lifestyle, and looking at the fact that sometimes the ethical choice is not always an easy one. Before I attempt to convince you any further to vote with this motion, it falls upon me to introduce tonight's speakers. The first speaker on the opposition tonight is Michael Akaladi Ayodeji, a PPEist at University College and your librarian. I would like to begin by thanking Michael for everything he has done this term for this society and for me. If it was not for him, I would not be standing here speaking in this debate tonight. Your second speaker is Michaela Peterson, a Canadian podcaster who runs the blog Don't Eat That. Famous for eating a meat-based lion diet, which consists solely of ruminant meat, salt and water, just as turkeys wouldn't vote for Christmas, Michaela wouldn't speak in favour of veganism. Moving on to Peter Stevenson, OBE, Chief Policy Advisor to Compassion in World Farming and a recipient of an RSPCA Lord Erskine Award. Known for authoring the UN Food and Agriculture Organization review of animal welfare legislation, Peter is a champion of animal welfare, so it surprises me to see him sitting on the opposite side of the bench this evening. Finally, the last speaker of the evening, Manuel Fieber, an outstanding member of Standing Committee from St. Hugh's College. Manuel is the oldest student speaker here, and I think possibly the oldest member of committee. So I find it a little surprising he's speaking in favour of an industry that prematurely kills off living beings. Love you, Manuel. Mr. President, these are your speakers, and they are most welcome. Before I begin, I want to add a warning that some of the things I will describe about the meat industry may be disturbing. I do this not to ruin your evening, but to share the cruel reality that animals today go through every single day. To share why the House would move beyond meat. Let me begin. Argument 1. Why moving beyond meat is the only ethical choice. I have 2 points to make. The title of the first point is, Murder is Bad. I want to be clear about just how bad some of the things that the meat industry does to animals are. Firstly, for some types of meat, animals are shot and left to bleed out. That's true, not just of what the underachieving son of a Tory donor would casually call game meat, but also true of any meat that you probably think of as rare or exotic. Secondly, animals are often gassed until they choke to death. The billions of chickens, and I mean billions, killed each year in the UK provide case in point. Thirdly, tricking animals into nets and then allowing them to flounder to death on the bodies of other animals, that's fish. I get that animals aren't as smart or as aware or as switched on as humans, But there are some pretty brainless humans out there. You wouldn't eat Piers Morgan or Nigel Farage. and you wouldn't eat them even if they were raised free range. I get that's partly because cannibalism is largely frowned upon, but it's also because we think it would be deeply wrong to inflict pain and kill one of our own for something as trivial as a bit of protein or a 3 a.m. kebab. Surely we ought to apply the same principles to animals. So this is argument number one. Maybe it's fair enough to think that doing these things to animals isn't as bad as doing them to humans, but for veganism to be the ethical choice, it has to be bad enough to gas, shoot, and drown animals. Point 2 of my argument, what I call the torture argument. Let's say after my last argument, you're not totally anti-killing things yet. That's okay, because there's other reasons why veganism is an ethical choice. The reason is the torture that animals are put through when they're farmed for meat. Here are some examples. 1, chickens are kept in tiny cages where their wings are snapped and they live out their lives in agony. 2, lambs are separated from their parents. And maybe you think I'm anthropomorphizing them, and I am a little bit. But there's plenty of studies to show that animals experience distress at being torn from their mothers who are taken off to be killed. 3, pigs are bred to be obese just so that humans can get more meat out of them. So they live out their lives barely able to move before they're slaughtered for meat. I implore the House to concede that this is no way to live. I can think of 3 possible reasons that might overcome this argument, but only 3. The first is that maybe, optimistically, these are just contingent facts about the meat industry. With better regulation, more free range, and more inspections of abattoirs, these things could change. False. For 3 reasons. The meat industry is already having to drive prices down to stay competitive. Raising a cow is expensive enough. Raising a cow in a large paddock with good food without making it overweight deliberately and without just shooting it at the first sign of disease, way more expensive. Secondly, there are massive space constraints. Take cows, billions killed every year for meat. There just isn't room on the planet for that many cows to be roaming around happily in big green paddocks. Thirdly, political incentives. Almost nobody votes based on animal interests, so political parties simply don't care about regulating it, let alone enforcing regulations about it. The second reason why perhaps my argument doesn't work is that at the end of the day, maybe these animals should be thankful for the meat industry. Without it, they wouldn't have come into existence in the first place. That's a redundant argument, though. Because if bringing things into existence is a good thing in itself, we should all be off making babies instead of here at the debate. The last reason why my argument might not prevail is if there are any countervailing reasons strong enough to outweigh the interests of animals. One thing that I've heard on the grapevine might be coming from the opposition side tonight is that veganism isn't accessible to anyone. It's a bit more expensive and a bit harder to access. That's a very tenuous argument in my opinion. For one, veganism becomes cheaper when demand goes up. So if you're anti-discrimination, you should be anti-meat. But on top of that, I think sometimes you have to bite the bullet and say that some actions, the killing of innocent animals being one of them, are some of the most important issues and should be treated as such. So finally, why must the House move beyond meat? The last 2 arguments that I made were meant to prove that any ethical choice must not involve the murder or torture of animals. Those are the 2 constraints. Why isn't vegetarianism sufficient? Well, the answer is men. Male chickens, useless for egg production. Male cows, about as useful as male humans when it comes to milk production. So what happens to male chickens and male cows while you're eating an omelette for breakfast? Well, the cows are sold into the meat industry and the chickens are either gassed or literally ground up. This is unacceptable. And it's for the same reasons that I outlined before. It's cheaper, there won't ever be much regulation, and in the end, these animals, if everyone were vegetarian, would be economically useless. Nobody would keep them alive. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not an easy choice. I myself am a meat eater, but veganism is the only ethical option. At the end of the night, we'll be asked to vote on this motion. I believe there is only one choice, to vote with the proposition. Vote aye and demonstrate that this House must move beyond meat. Thank you for your time.